Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you're joining. As Al said, I have the privilege of leading the people data and analytics team at Mastercard. I'll talk a bit more about that team shortly. But I wanted to take a slightly different angle for the content today. You know, we talk about a lot of great use cases, whether it's O&A, predictive attrition, employee experience, sentiment analysis, and these are all good and well. But I think, you know, at times we find these small cracks in the foundation. And while small at the outset, these can become more serious issues later on if they're not addressed. And so, what I want to talk about today is going back to the basics. What are those essential building blocks that enable us to scale the impact that we have on people and organizations? And so, perhaps the challenges that we've seen at Mastercard and I've seen in my past life leading people analytics functions at other organizations will resonate with you. I don't think they're particularly unique to us at Mastercard, but you know the operational reporting tasks can amount to quite a bit over time if they're not addressed. And so if you're inundated with operational tasks, you know, basic queries like what's my workforce look like, what's the attrition rate, how are we doing in diversity, how many people are expected to show up next week, how many people changed jobs last month. These basic operational tasks can derail us in terms of the strategic initiatives we're seeking to drive. And so if that resonates with you, I have some strategies that are going to help. Perhaps the case is that you've released some dashboards, some analytical solutions, and they're not utilized as we might expect. There's probably nothing more disheartening than pouring ourselves into what we think are going to be valuable analytical solutions, and then those queries that those are intended to address continue to come back to us. Or perhaps the issue is reconciliation. You know, we're providing employee level detailed reports, and sometimes those reports can be used to create different definitions than the standards we're seeking to drive. And somehow we wind up with a capacity model that looks something like this, where a relatively small slice of the capacity allocation is directed toward that really valuable bucket of strategic decision support, because there's so much work being done in the operational reporting and manual data preparation stages. And so if that resonates with you, I want to talk about 10 different strategies that can enable us to correct some of those foundational issues or shortcomings, rather, that will enable us to scale our impact. So number one is design thinking. You know, one of the reasons I got into people analytics, and I suspect that many of you listening are the same, is for the impact that we can have on people's lives. You know, at the end of the day, there's a human need behind everything we do. When we look at data sets, when we look at observations in our data, these are people. These are people who deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. They have families, they have needs, they have talents that need to be unleashed. And so I think first and foremost, when we think about people analytics, we should never lose sight of that. There's a human need behind this. And it's our job to surface insights that optimize organizational performance and conditions under which people can really thrive and work in life. And so to do that effectively, we have to think about the end user. We have to think about our audience. Who's going to be actioning on these insights? Because until we can do that, we can't effectively translate the findings into terms that really resonate with those who can authorize the action. And so first and foremost, design thinking. Who is at the heart of what we're doing, and who's going to be actioning on this, and what is their lens on the world in terms of how they think about the phenomena that we're going after through data and analytics. Number two, change. I think the importance of change management can't be overstated. I think this is really foundational to any transformation effort. And when we think about change management here, I could be talking about a couple of different things, but what I'm really talking about is how do we roll out self-service solutions? How do we roll out analytical solutions to the organization in a way that they're embraced, that they're welcome, that they're fully utilized, that people are comfortable leveraging them? Because often what happens is we roll out these solutions, and change management's somewhat of an afterthought. And so again, those queries keep coming back, but the solutions were designed to prevent them. And so what I'm going to talk about today might seem very linear in nature. And often when we think about the people analytics journey, it does seem very linear on paper. But the reality is it looks much more like the Trollstigen in Norway. It's a mountainous road. albeit a beautiful landscape, there's a lot of twists and turns and unexpected bumps and creeks to traverse, and things that we have to do our best to anticipate from the outset to realize that effective change. And one model that I've often leveraged in thinking about how to realize change is this. There's really five key components as part of this model. There's the vision. We have to crystallize why we're making the change, why it's important to make the change, and what the benefits are going to be. We have to make sure that those consuming our dashboards, our insights, have the skills to interpret, and it's not an intimidating thing to leverage and make use of these solutions. The incentives really relate to what's in it for them. I think, in every presentation, when we're trying to roll out a new solution, that should be the first slide, right? What's in it for you? Quickly connect those dots in terms of the incentives and the benefits. And then resources. I'll talk momentarily about the concept of a learning pathway. How can we make sure that as new people join the organization or new people roll into the HR function from other parts of the organization, that we have the required resources to ensure they know what's available, they know how to access it, they know the importance of it, they know how to interpret the data to really drive decisions. And then the action plan. Again, change management shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be something that's embedded in how we implement different analytical solutions from the outset. And the result of any one of these components missing is pretty significant. So if we're missing the vision, people are confused as to why we're making a change. If people are missing the skills, they have a degree of anxiety about how they're going to get the answers to the questions on which they historically have depended on the people analytics team. If the incentives are missing, there's a sense of resistance to the change. Why embrace it if there's not a clear benefit for me? If there's not the resources, people are frustrated because maybe there's technical issues with dashboards, or maybe it's not clear on how to access certain dashboards or interpreting them. And then if there's not a clear action plan, there's false starts. Often when we roll out dashboards, it's best to start with a small pilot group, work out the kinks, make sure that we have that voice of customer to ensure it's as intuitive as we expect before rolling that solution out to the wider employee base or the wider HR base. And so these are five key facets of effective change. And again, I think that concept of change management should be embedded from the outset. The third of the 10 items I'm going to discuss today relates to the framework. And so at MasterCard, we have this saying that smooth is fast. And going back to my title, slowing down to speed up, I think that's what this is all about. Often it's perhaps seen as slowing down, but the reality is, by slowing down and having a rigorous framework to guide us in terms of the end-to-end analytical life cycle, often it's much more predictable. We're asking the right questions up front. We're not trying to prematurely solution or put deadlines on things before we really understand the need or the ask or the complexities. And so smooth is fast. We slow down to speed up. And this is the framework that kind of guides the various analytics activities that we have in some form or fashion. We call it the 4D framework. And the 4Ds really are discover, design, develop, and deliver. And as part of each of these, there's a set of questions that really guide us, in terms of living in that problem zone, resisting the urge to solution too early in the process, resisting the urge to put, ETAs on solutions. We want to make sure that beyond what might be asked, we want to make sure that we understand the root problem statement, that we understand what's at the core of what's being requested by the business so that we can bring to bear on that challenge effective solutions that really enable them to take data-driven decisions about talent. And so for the discover phase, we're really living in the problem zone. It could be through interviews, it could be through surveys, it could be through a number of mechanisms, but we're really just seeking to understand. What is it that they're requesting? What are they challenged with? What guiding theories might the business be able to posit that might explain the organizational phenomena that we are currently observing? And what hypotheses can be extracted from those theories that we might be able to test empirically with data and analytics? Once we move out of that problem zone, out of that discover zone, we enter the design phase. And the goal here is that we're very agile, right? The wireframes, the design concepts, the prototypes are very simple because often what we propose in round one is completely discarded. And as we iterate on that, as we work with the requester to make sure that what we deliver is going to provide value based on that problem statement, we want to make sure that we can fail fast, right? It's not something that we're wedded to. It's not something into which we've put a lot of effort. But these are very simple, lightweight wireframes that enable us to iterate quickly. Once we get to a place where we have sign-off, when the requester, when the business says yes, this will meet my needs, this is what I need to really understand what's going on here, then we gain sign-off from the business requester before we move into the development phase. Once we move into the development phase, we do have some patterns, some development patterns to which we adhere. And so we want to make sure that we're consistent so that someone who might be supporting this years down the road, even if they weren't part of building it, it adheres to a pattern, and it's very simple to ascertain, well, what this is doing, what the code's doing, the approach we were taking, because it's very similar to other jobs that we've written. Global calculations. And so we don't want to maintain multiple sets of logic, right? So we really look for what are those calculations that we can pass into and leverage across a variety of different use cases, whether it's dashboards or base data sets for advanced analytics or even operational reports. We want to make sure that we're maintaining kind of the gold standard of our calculations. When it comes to automation, not everything is automated. Not everything is something that we're going to refresh on a regular cadence. But with that said, we always want to think about automation possibilities from the outset, because the degree of technical debt that we inherit by not asking that question is pretty significant. It can take as much time to refresh an analysis as it did to build the initial solution. And so we want to be automation minded. If there's a chance that we need to refresh a given analysis, we want to structure that code. We want to structure the work in a way that facilitates regular refreshes of that data. Peer reviews, obviously a best practice, and then sign off from the business again before we migrate to the upper environment, to the production environment. Once we deliver, the job doesn't stop there, right? This is where the insights, the commentary, the storytelling comes in to make sure that it's clear what we found, what we surfaced, kind of the salient points. And that's also where the training kicks in. We want to make sure that as we roll this out, it's not just rolling out a solution, but it's ensuring that the wider HR audience, or maybe the managers across the organization, as the case might be, are very comfortable with what we've rolled out and how to effectively leverage that to drive action within their pocket of the organization. If it's a dashboard, we have capabilities on the server to monitor utilization, to make sure that there's not a fall off in utilization. And if there is, we want to proactively address that by following up with HRBPs or HRCOE leads to find out why it's not being leveraged as effectively. Maybe it's not as intuitive as we thought, or maybe it doesn't provide the intended value. But nevertheless, we want to be proactive so that those queries, that those solutions were intended to address, don't come back in the form of ad hoc requests. And then follow up and refreshes. If it's an analysis that needs to be refreshed, or if it's a model that needs to be retrained, we want to make sure that we embed that into this process so that it's not an afterthought, but it's part of our framework. So this kind of, again, this is our end-to-end life cycle. This is how we think about people analytics solutions, and this really protects us from not asking the right questions up front and having those surface at the 11th hour and derailing, the project at late stages. So once we've thought about change management, we're leading with design thinking in mind. We have this framework in place. Where do we begin in terms of making sure that our foundation is rock solid, making sure that it supports scalability? Well, I think the natural place to start is with our core questions. And so this is probably true for all organizations. There's a core set of questions that HR is asking. Maybe it's the executive leadership team, maybe it's the CHRO, maybe it's HRBPs, but there's a core set of questions that we have to be readily available to address. These are basic things like, how's the workforce distributed across lines of business? Or are internal moves consistent across time and geography? Are we making progress with respect to diversity? Are 12-month retention rates significantly different across various employee segments of interest? And so we don't want to respond to these in a kind of a reactionary way. We want to develop standardized solutions that we can put out there, self-service solutions that enable the business to answer these without a reliance or a dependency on people analytics. Because ultimately the goal, again, is to free up that capacity for strategic decision support and minimize the amount of operational reporting tasks that we have. And so with that in mind, with the core questions defined, we have to align on definitions. And this is something, in my opinion, that's deceptively simple, because you take something like headcount or a turnover or a retention rate, and it seems like these should be relatively straightforward KPIs and metrics to define. But in my experience, there's a lot of nuance to these definitions, and there's a lot of different opinions about how they should be defined. And so it's really key that we work with the key stakeholders. We don't define these in a silo, but we do so in partnership with the various HR COE leads. Because the reality is, if we define them and they're at odds with other definitions, any solutions that we develop based on these definitions are not going to be leveraged. And so it's really key that we have a strong partnership with these key stakeholders to align on these definitions. Once those definitions are established, once they're defined, it's very key to formalize them in the form of a data dictionary. And so we don't want to have to dive into the logic each time someone asks, how do we define what a turnover rate is, right? We should have them spelled out in English form in a data dictionary. It's readily accessible. It's published for the wider audience to see. It's very clear on what these metrics represent and what they don't represent. I think it's important too, when we think about definitions, these are often contextual, right? And so you think about something like an open position. An open position to talent acquisition means something very different than an open position to finance. For talent acquisition, it's what do I need to recruit on? What roles do I need to fill? To finance, for workforce planning, they're thinking about the full population of positions, irrespective of whether they have a requisition attached to them, because ultimately those positions, if they're open, will hit the bottom line at some point. And so it may be naive to arrive at a single definition for each, but there's a broader context that really informs what these different definitions mean. So important to consider. Once we have the definitions, then we can start building these standardized solutions, these self-service solutions, starting with dashboards, right? Building flexible self-service dashboards that provide ready access to these metrics to reduce that ad hoc request volume. And again, going back to the change management piece, it's really important that to gain the desired level of adoption across the broader HR community, that the HR community has to have confidence in their ability to navigate and interpret the data. If they don't, these won't be utilized as expected. And so going back to my earlier comment about the learning pathway, I think this is really important, because this not only ensures visibility in terms of what solutions we have and how to access them, and that the questions that they address, but also ensures adequate data literacy and an understanding of data privacy principles as a prereq for gaining access to the various reports and dashboards. And I think that's really key. And then we should do the same thing with reports, right? Beyond the dashboards, we all have operational reporting needs. Reporting will never fully go away, but we should reduce reports to a small set of what we call at Mastercard certified reports, which represent the latest and greatest configuration of the source systems, as well as the standard definitions that we've aligned on in partnership with our various HR COE leads. And so we segment these by major category and data class. So a major category being things like active workforce, headcount, termination, moves, et cetera. And then within the context of each of those major categories, different classifications of data, which I'll talk more about momentarily. And so the real benefit of this is that we ensure consistency in how these different data elements are derived, and ensure that different definitions and different metrics are not being surfaced as a result. This is kind of the authoritative source of these different derived data elements and fields that we're passing into the reports. So with a core set of standardized solutions and full alignment on definitions, then we can talk about automation, right? We don't want to refresh these dashboards on a regular cadence if we have some automation capabilities. And so the reality today in the year 2020 is that if you're performing a manual task on a regular cadence, chances are it can be automated, whether that's through robotic process automation or through an ETL tool or through an open source scripting language. We can usually automate the process of manually preparing data, wrangling it, cleaning, transforming it, aggregating it, etc. But the question is, what do we automate, right? Just because something can be automated doesn't necessarily mean that it makes sense to invest the effort. And so we often think about what to automate along two vectors. The first vector is value, the second vector is effort. And so ideally, we want to find those automation opportunities which would be highly valuable but require relatively low effort to automate. And high value could take the form of this is going to an executive level audience, it's a really important initiative, or it could take the form of this is something that we have to refresh on a daily cadence, a weekly cadence, a monthly cadence, and therefore if we don't have automation capabilities, it's going to require significant effort to prepare that data, to shape that data, to surface that set of insights on a regular cadence. On the opposite end of this matrix is the high effort, low value quadrant. And certainly anything falling within this, we don't want to automate because it's not worth the effort it would require. So it's kind of the Pareto principle, if you're familiar with that. 80% of the value is going to come from about 20% of the effort. And the other 20% of the value takes about 80% of the effort. And so we want to it's kind of an optimization problem. We want to find what are those opportunities that require relatively little effort for maximum value. One recommendation and something that we've been looking at in terms of what do we automate and what solutions do we build is looking to categorize the ad hoc requests that come in. And so as we think about reporting requests or insight requests, we can think about what are the common denominators. Often, there's certainly some one-offs that we probably will never see again, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the requests around that. But when we return to business as usual, there is some patterns in terms of the ad hoc requests that come in, and so we do some reporting on that to really inform what sort of standard solutions should we be thinking about. And if it's a solution that we already have available to us, then it comes back to change management, right? Why are we being asked for these things when we have solutions that address them? So we need to go back and make sure that everyone's well aware of what solutions we've made available to the organization. But it comes back to this, for every request that comes in, viewing the ad hoc request through the prism of how can we ensure that we never again receive a request for this data? Is that possible? Is there something that we could stand up that would preclude ad hoc requests of this nature in the future? So number 6, prioritization and planning. So, every company I've been a part of, prioritization is a real challenge because there's always far more demand than capacity. And that's great because it means that, there's a real demand for data and analytics and using insights to inform talent decisions. But at the same time, it's a challenge because to each requester, their priority is the most important request. And if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So it's our job to look holistically across everything that's coming in from the various HR COE leads, the HRBPs, the business, and to ask the question, what's going to provide the most value? Where's the biggest bang for our buck, as it were, going to be, and what should we prioritize? And with that comes the need to assess dependencies. And so one thing that we've recently stood up that I think is going to serve us very well, we're still early in this journey, but it's a unified planning session. And so if you've been a part of an agile framework in the past, there's PI planning sessions where you plan out for 8 weeks, you divide the 8 weeks into 2-week sprints or iterations, and ensure alignment on the PI planning goals. And so the big point here is that I can't prioritize something unless the team on which I have a dependency also prioritizes it, because I can only take it so far. I can't move it fully across the line. And so it's really important that from the outset we align. Here's the priorities for the people data and analytics team. The HR technology team comes to the table. Here's what we're planning to do in the way of system configuration and security. We work with our operations and technology counterparts from a production solution and data warehousing perspective. And we make sure that our priorities are well aligned, and we negotiate, right? There's some things that I would say are priorities that they're not able to prioritize. So we have to negotiate back and forth. But the bottom line is this: we have a framework in place to ensure that the priorities of each of these respective organizations or functions are well understood and that we can prioritize accordingly. I also think it's really important, whether you have formal PI ceremonies as part of a rigid, agile framework, or it's more informal, maybe a summary email following the planning session. I think it's really important that senior leaders and HR COE leads are part of those conversations, because that's where the demand comes from. And if it's not clear what our priorities are and what we're driving, over the next 2 months, it's really difficult to plan, right? Because there's a lot of unforeseen things. We have to make sure that we understand the needs of the business before we enter these planning sessions, because ultimately those inform what we're going to work. And this is really going to serve us well in terms of managing our strategic objectives for 2020 in light of all the kind of BAU and operational and tactical items that come up. Certainly BAU, there's always a bucket for BAU. There's always a bucket for those unplanned activities. But nevertheless, we can't lose sight of the strategic priorities that we're driving. Case management tools can also really help with this. So rather than managing everything through emails, all the ad hoc requests, we have a case management tool that enables some auto routing and assignments so that we can appropriately route those requests to the individual who will ultimately work them. And then we can also leverage that case management tool, as I said before, for reporting on the types, the categories of ad hoc requests that come through to inform the different self-service solutions that we stand up. And properly designed, this takes some work and it takes a flexible solution, but properly designed, those requests can also capture the necessary information up front to really understand what is this request and avoid the clarity-seeking email exchanges back and forth. So the next topic, data management, not the most exciting topic in the world for people analytics, but I think it's really foundational to elevating our effectiveness and the ability to scale our solutions. So when I talk about data management, these are the different facets that I'm talking about, from governance of the data to the architecture, how the data from disparate systems is integrated, cleaned, transformed, documented so that we understand the full lineage. It comprises a number of things onto the quality of the data that's coming out of our different solutions. So the first thing I would recommend, this is something that we've done at MasterCard that has really paid some dividends, is to form a data governance committee specific to people analytics, specific to our people data. And in the case of our data governance committee, the members comprise members of my team, people analytics, data privacy, members of HR technology, and we have special guests that attend on a case-by-case basis, such as employment law. And so, the purpose is to really review the types of requests that we're getting each week. And this is a weekly cadence that we convene. But each week, review the requests that come in and decision on whether the access to this data should be permitted and for what period of time. I make no claims to be an attorney. I'm not an attorney. I leave that to the experts. And that's why I think it's really great to have members of our legal counsel as part of this committee, from a data privacy perspective as well as an employment law perspective, to ensure that if there are use cases that come up or requests that come up that kind of fall into that out of the ordinary category, we err on the side of extra caution to make sure that we're dotting our I's, crossing our T's, and that we're doing what's right, in the interest of employee privacy and how that data will be leveraged. My recommendation is that if you stand this up, after enough historical data is amassed on the types of requests that come through the committee, we can start to categorize them and ask the question, can we create some pre-approved use cases based on this so that we don't have to convene for these types of requests in the future? There's a precedent set. We've discussed this type of request in the past, and now maybe we have a playbook of sorts for these pre-approved use cases to minimize the number of requests coming to the committee. The data element classification. So we categorize every data element that HR owns into three categories, three broad categories. There's internal, restricted, and confidential. So the internal is basically data that is available to the wider employee base. This is data that you can find in the global employee address book, the person's name, their work email address, their work phone number extension, etc. Restricted data is data that is really isolated to a select number of people with the need to know. So for, diversity and inclusion insights, it would be things like gender, ethnicity, but things that we wouldn't open up to the broader employee population. They're really restricted to a select few. And then confidential, this category represents the most sensitive level of data. These are things that data elements such as national identifiers, social security number in the case of the U.S. That really no one needs access to. It's encrypted. It's not open for others to see. Things like compensation, performance reviews. The highest level of sensitivity, and we make sure that we safeguard that data accordingly. And so this classification enables us to have a conversation about these different requests that come through the committee based on the classification of the data that's being requested. So what we did, which may work for you as well, we went through an exercise over a period of several months where we identified all the different personas, which are really groups of employees that need access to HR data in some form or fashion. And then we created a matrix of sorts for each of the three categories, the classifications of data. Within the context of our major categories. So, what are the confidential data elements within the context of headcount data? What are the confidential data elements within the context of talent acquisition and requisition data, position, benefits, payroll, and the list goes on and on. And then we've flagged basically what we think these different personas should have access to, and we've circulated this with our HR leadership team and data privacy to ensure alignment, and that really informs how we structure access to the various analytical solutions that we stand up with respect to the underlying employee level detail. And so it's really important that there's this contextual element, because as we categorize into three buckets all of the different data elements that HR owns, we don't want to open up restricted access to every restricted data element across all of these contexts, right? If a talent acquisition professional needs access to restricted data for requisitions, we don't want to give restricted data to them for benefits or payroll or some other context that they don't need access to. And so it's highly contextual in nature. So when we think about how that matrix translates into how we manage our access, well, we do it in the form of role entitlements. And so we've created roles that look something like this, by function. So we have read and write roles for our people analysts, read and write access for our data scientists, read and write access for our data engineers. We have one for the wider HR organization and one for the general employee population. And one recommendation would be that the owner of these roles, the approver of these roles, would be the chair of the People Data Governance Committee. In the case of MasterCard, that's me, and I have a delegate as well. But as new people join the organization and they need access to HR data, they submit requests for one of these entitlements, and then that's routed to me. We discuss that as part of the HR Data Governance Committee to ensure alignment with that matrix that I just showed, to make sure that we're abiding by data minimization principles and that we're not releasing access to data that is beyond the scope of that individual's role. Two more things on the data management front. So data lineage, with regulations like GDPR, it's really important that we think about where data is flowing in the organization so that we can do a full impact analysis. And so if we need to purge employees' data, we need to understand all of the various downstream reports, applications, data marts, third-party vendors through which that data is passed. And then last but not least, data profiling. We never want to find out from an end user that we have a data quality issue. We want to proactively monitor that. And so we've tapped into our enterprise data management's capabilities to profile the data. We have various data profiling rules. We set up these rules for continuous variables, for categorical variables. So in the case of continuous variables, it could be an acceptable range. And if we observe a value that falls outside that range, we proactively trigger a notification and escalate that. If it's a categorical variable, we expect certain values, certain categories, and if we observe something outside the expected values, again, that triggers. But I think when we talk about data profiling, while we can always address this in the analytical layer, we can address these anomalies, often it's an issue of going upstream. So in the context of systems thinking, we want to go upstream and ask the question, what sort of validation rules could we enforce in the source system itself, in the UI, to ensure that that data cannot be entered? It could be the UI in the case of a manager self-service model, or it could be kind of a back-end data load process. But how can we ensure that the right data entry protocols to preclude these bad entries from occurring? Centralized data. So this is one of the more exciting things that we've been tackling. And so we want to think about how do we take all the data from our various data sources, our core HCM, our ATS, our learning and development platforms, and a host of other applications that we own and manage, and structure data in ways that protect the integrity of the data and the privacy of the data based on all the controls that I've mentioned as part of the data management piece. Ensure adherence to our standards and definitions, facilitate the needs of the business, and support performant queries. We want it to be very quick and performant. And so this is a high-level architectural view of our workforce intelligence platform. And this is how we extract the most how we will extract the most value from our people data. But in short, we have a data lake, which is where we can house a lot of historical data. We can compress it in Hadoop, and it's very inexpensive to store large amounts of data there. And then, attached to that data lake, we have a number of data science and advanced analytics tools, which we call the data science workbench. Open source tools like Python and R. We have SAS, we have the Hue ecosystem of, kind of the relational layer on top of the Hadoop file system, which would be, Impala, Hive, Pig. And then we have, graph databases for ONA, such as Neo4j and many others. But then we also feed that data from Hadoop to what we call curated data marts within another segment of our platform. And these curated data marts are really designed for specific purposes. They could be reports, they could be dashboards. We have a number of BI tools that we connect to these curated data marts. But they, again, ensure a single source of truth so that we don't have reports and different kind of flavor of the day reporting and different definitions being surfaced around the organization. And then across all of this, we do have logging and monitoring capabilities. So when we talk about approvals at the Data Governance Committee, we do have the means of going back and understanding what data is being queried and by whom and how often to ensure alignment with those approved use cases. So, there's a number of ways you can think about how to structure the data. I tend to like this framework, which is called data vault modeling. And this is a framework which basically has a set of what we call ensembles. So there's a collection of attributes related to the worker, a collection of data elements related to positions, and a collection of data elements related to candidate. There's far more, but for sake of simplicity, I'll keep to these three. And you think about the relationships between all of these. A worker sits in a position, a candidate applies to a position, and so position really sits at the nexus of the worker and candidate ensembles. And then attached to a person's seat, a person's position is an org assignment, a job. It sits in a given location. It's attached to a company. And then we're able to tell a very comprehensive story throughout the employee life cycle as a result. But the challenge is that the joins and the complexities of bringing all of this together. We've got the time dimension. We've got a number of different factors at play. It's very complex. And so what we've done is we've taken the approach of abstracting away all of these complexities, all the business rules, the joins, the transformations, selection criteria, into curated views that the people analytics team will be able to hit directly, or dashboards will be able to point to. And these represent all the types of data that we would need in a very curated manner. All of these standardized definitions, the detail, the summaries, our type 2 slowly changing dimensions, so that we can see for each employee ID, for a number of different events of interest, what is the history. Employee was hired, an employee moved jobs, moved locations, changed managers, terminated, etc. We can see that full history in one curated view. So some best practices to think about here: always drive toward a single source of truth. Again, we want to point to one single source of truth. This is a data mart for all HR KPIs, metrics, or an authoritative source for analytical data sets. Apply the transformations upstream too, because the further downstream we go in terms of how we transform data, how we derive data elements, the more likely it is that we'll have redundant set of logic to maintain, and that's going to increase our maintenance tasks. And so if we can drive those elements ideally in the source and pass them through to our various reports and dashboards and data marts, then we only have to maintain the logic in one place. And that consistency in definitions and timing is really the key. As we roll out these solutions too, I think it's important to note that if we don't lock down access to individual level detail, there's still the opportunity that other definitions can be created. And so while it's often the need that we need to see the detail, if there's, in a summary dashboard, we see that 5 people changed jobs last month, we often want to know who are those 5 people. But we work to restrict the ability to download that employee level detail, so that different definitions can't be created based on different ways of filtering and different logical approaches. Real quick on our functional structure, organizing for success is very important, and there's no, there's no one way to go about this. It depends on your organization, but I'll just walk through very briefly how we're structured. And so the people data and analytics team is the team I have the privilege of leading. And then I have 2 peer teams. One is strategic workforce planning and another is HR technology. But within our people data and analytics team, there's really 2 pillars: what we call data and analytics capabilities, and then people analytics. And so we actually have 3 different people analytics teams that are aligned to different parts of our business. And this is really key to our success, because Mastercard's a global company. We have international markets, different regions, whether it's Asia Pacific, Middle East, Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, Europe. We have North America markets. And so it's really important that we have people on the ground in these different regions who understand the context here to effectively address the phenomena of interest. And so we have the first people analytics team is aligned to our various HR COEs. Learning and development, talent acquisition, etc. We have another that's aligned to different business units. And so each member of that people analytics team is aligned to a different business unit, and they provide dedicated support to that unit. And then we have a third people analytics team that's aligned to the regions. And so we actually have people that sit in these different regions, in Dubai and Singapore and London, as well as North America. And that model has proven very successful to understand what are the needs of the business. It's not a one size fits all. It's not a kind of a rotational approach, but we have dedicated alignment. And so providing support for each of these functions is our data and analytics capabilities. So we have support from an analytical POC perspective, where the people analytics team understands the ask, but needs maybe some support preparing the data, shaping the data, getting that ready. And so we have a team, data and analytics services, that supports that. We have a data engineering and architecture team, which is really our data engineers. They work with our operations and technology counterparts to take POCs and migrate them into production-ready solutions. And then we have that data management and governance function that is really key to ensure that we're protecting, in partnership with data privacy, employment law, and our enterprise data management team, the very sensitive data that we make use of. And then, last but not least, trust. I think this is really the key, because nothing else I talked about matters if we don't have the trust of our employees, the trust of our business stakeholders, and I think that this often goes overlooked. But the reality is we work to remain very principled and always operate in accordance with values. No one ever tells us to to slow down because we're moving too fast, right? It's always, can we have that yesterday or last week? But it's really on us to ensure that we're never compromising quality for greater velocity. This is one of my mantras, and it's really on us to ensure that anything that goes out the door is trusted, even if it means slowing down. Again, slowing down to speed up. It's about ensuring the veracity of the insights that we're surfacing, even if it takes a bit longer than initially planned. Being transparent with employees about how their data are used. Again, this comes back to our partnership with data privacy and employment law, and making sure that we're abiding by their best practices and also regulations in the different regions and jurisdictions in which we operate. And always thinking in pro-employee. So, how can data be used in a way that's maybe not intended? And how do we proactively address that to ensure that the consumers understand what this data represents and what it does not represent? And last but not least, building strong relationships with our stakeholders. So it's really important that they understand that we understand their needs. And part of that comes through our model, how we're structured, in terms of dedicated alignment with our different business units and regions and HRCOEs. That's the only way that we can truly understand the needs and what's behind some of the requests that come our way. So I'll just leave you with this. Again, this is not a linear journey, and what I described is not necessarily a prereq for getting started. And so wherever you are in the journey, just know that we don't have to have everything in order to have impact. On a parallel path, we can harness the power of our data to do great things for people and for the organization. And again, that's why I'm in people analytics. I suspect many of you are the same, and people need us right now, perhaps more than ever. And I think it's just an incredible privilege that we all have to make effective use of data and analytics to bring that to bear on the challenges facing organizations. So with that, Al, I'll turn it back to you.
Hey, Craig, that was outstanding. That was textbook. That was, you couldn't see me, but I got my hands up cheering a couple times, just some of the themes that you carried. And as we come up on time here, I do have one question for you. And one of the things I cheered about was the governance that is lacking in so many companies, because it sounds like you've built a coalition of people who understand not only what you do, but what you're trying to achieve as an outcome, and that helps you bring about change as a result. So a great theme to carry. My pointed question to you, again, as we wrap, is you have an uncommon eloquence and understanding of what I would call the data to change process. You understand data technology and the downstream change management that needs to ensue. However, you came, correct me if I'm wrong, from a more technical and research background. So my question, succinctly as possible, is how did you achieve a more broad, diverse perspective to cover that whole data to change process? Was that just by staying in curiosity and interviewing stakeholders over time, or was it something you did educationally? How did you get that breadth of knowledge?
Yeah, I think it's really just being teachable. I try to function like a sponge, and every meeting I'm in, everyone I meet, there's always something I can learn. Whether from the technology angle, from the data perspective, I don't claim to have all the answers. But just by tapping into the wealth of knowledge that everyone possesses, trying to stand up a holistic framework that again brings in those experts. I'm not an attorney, I don't give any legal advice, but I relegate that to the experts. And where I'm not sure, I bring the right people to the table.
Well, congratulations on what you've achieved. And again, thanks for getting up so early and sharing with the audience today. And you be well, and look forward to catching up soon. Be well.
All right. Thanks, Al. Appreciate it. Take care.